Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Wattsburg Area School District, where we are student-centered and future-focused for a world-class education. This is the Monday, January 13th work session that I will now call to order. Would you please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Brummagem.
Present.
Mrs. Burlingham.
Here.
Mrs. Hetherington.
Here.
Mrs. Lee.
Here.
Mr. Morvay.
Here.
Dr. Pushchek.
Here.
Mr. Williams.
Here.
Mr. Blazer.
Present.
And Mr. Young.
Present. Dr. Berlin, will we have a school report for next week?
No, we're not going,
But we won't have a report, a school report
Okay.
next week.
Excellent. Next on the agenda is the guest and citizen comments. I don't believe we've had anyone sign up. She's running.
she can move so quickly.
And we're clear. All right. Next, to set the agenda for next week, we recognize Dr. Berlin. Will there be a superintendent's report? for
Yes,
next
I
week?
will have a brief report next week, Mr. President.
Thank you, Dr. Berlin. I will now pause for Mrs. Bendig. We will now turn the floor over to Mrs. Bendig for the business administrator's report.
Thank you, Mr. President. For this evening, as I mentioned at our December meeting, I'll have two sets of treasurer's reports. Due to the timing of the reorganization meeting, there isn't time to prepare you don't even have the bank statements by the time the board meeting is. So, general fund treasurer's report as of November 30th, $14,363,698.82. And then as of December 31st, 2024, $14,704,088.25. The year-to-date budget versus actual report will be ready for next week. Capital projects, that as of November 30th, $397,855.48. And as of December 31st, $17.22. So the difference there is there was a transfer from the tech school bond proceed account. We closed that account with the closing of with the tech school project being finished. We've made all of our payments. There was money left over in there. About $311,000 was for our first payment that we actually made out of our general fund before the bond proceeds were here. And then there was about $50,000 in interest that got moved over to our general fund to realize for money to be used. So that was good. And then the cafeteria, as of November 30th, $908,150.44. And as of December 31st, $839,293.65. I'll have the cafeteria profit and loss report for next week. And the student activities balance as of the end of November, $57,265.03. And then as of the end of December, $61,460.43. Moving on to the bill lists. Checks already written. This would be prior to the work session. So these are all of the checks that have been written since December 3rd or 4th after our reorg meeting in December. For general fund, it's $697,335.80. And then for the cafeteria, $248,378.79. I will have additional bill lists for next week. And that is all I have.
Does anyone have any questions for Mrs. Bendig on the treasurer's report? Hearing none, those will be moved over for next week's regular board meeting. Moving on, there are no items under legal advisement currently, so I will turn over to Dr. Pushjack for finance.
Thank you, Mr. President. 6 items under finance for the board's consideration next week. 7A is the budgetary transfers, the standard budget to actual report. 7B would be the budgetary amendment. 7C is the increase to the IRS mileage rate. 7D is the local audit report that we just had presented to us. We will need to take action to approve that. 7E is the Act 1 resolution. Just to remind the board and the public, the Act 1 resolution that the board will consider would be confirming that any tax rate or tax increase would not exceed the index assigned to our district. And finally, 7F is tax collector compensation, which we review from time to time to look at the increase in their compensation. So those 6 items under finance for the board's consideration for next week, Mr. President.
Thank you, Dr. Pushjack. Are there any questions on the items under finance?
Mr. President,
Yes, sir.
I just had a couple questions about the local audit report. So no questions about the actual report. I guess I'll echo Dr. Berlin's comments that thanks to Vicki and all of her staff for keeping us in great financial shape. My questions are more about the audit firm. So can you remind me, do we do a multi-year contracts with them? I know we approve it annually, but are we locked in for a time frame or not with that firm?
In order to switch to a different firm, we would have to do an RFP. We're not necessarily locked in with them, but in order to move to a different firm, you'd want to make sure that you are getting the same type of service for the same amount of cost. An RFP, and Dr. Berlin and I had spoke about that a couple of years ago. There was quite a bit of an increase about 2 years ago in their fee. Because they're having to raise their salaries to their accountants to keep from them having a revolving door in their office, which doesn't help us because then every time we have a new audit, we've got new people and we have to explain to them how we do business every year. So they're trying to keep, get consistency within their staff. The problem that we decided not to go out to RFP to search for another service at the time was some auditing firms are getting out of doing school business and their firms are actually smaller. So if we go out to RFP and no one else bids on it and we've now kind of pushed our own auditing firm that we've had a long-term relationship with off, maybe they don't even want us at that point. So at the time, it was decided to not do that. But that's how that process goes.
And I don't know, my recollection could be a little bit off, but I've been on the board 6 years now, and I think they've been auditors for all 6 years. You remember how far back we've had them? I guess I'll just put out there that a thought would be to look at going out for bid, inviting them to bid as well. But I totally recognize everything that you're saying about the lack of depth in the audit pool, so we might not do any better. It was more just sometimes fresh eyes are a good idea every once in a while. And I guess the last question, I know that we talk and we look a lot of times at our academic performance and we want to compare ourselves to other districts locally. We've talked about how, those reflections are unfair when the financials are not equal. So districts that have different tax bases sometimes have different academic outputs, as we've all talked about and seen. I guess I was just curious, well, the audit compares our financials to our prior year financials. Is there any comparison to our financials to other districts? So if another district, anywhere locally or not, that has, let's say, around a $30 million budget, I guess I'd just be curious, are there any reports out there, anything that is created? I'm not trying to ask the staff to go research this. I'm curious if there's anything out there that shows other districts in a similar financial point, let's say similar tax bases, do they spend per student what we spend? Do they have the capital assets? And as great as our financials look, I guess, are we standing out in a good way that way as well that we might want to let others know? This question.
Yeah, that's a good question, Mr. Blazer, and the answer is there There are some reports available, and they're mostly through private firms that provide that service and analyze all of the annual financial data that every school district submits. So from time to time, I've had charts that show us, on a scatter plot. That's a system that we had been using called IDEX, and it can drill into some of the things that you're talking about. So that's, we had from time to time tried to show the board how we are in certain areas, to show that you are getting return on your investment, and academics is one. Like, of the 10 other schools most similar to us, our academic performance in the state of Pennsylvania is number one. So you're getting the most for your dollars here in comparison. Now, is that good enough for us, for Wattsburg? No, but it's an indicator that, we are doing the right things for our students. We can always do them better, we can do them faster, but we're making good decisions. Now, IDEX, unfortunately, or fortunately, was bought out by another company I think it's called InFocus. So they've transferred over to us, or will be transferring over to us, rights to use their platform through the end of this school year. And I have not got into that system yet. I was getting pretty familiar with IDEX when I would go looking. So I intend to take a look at that new platform and see what type of data that might be able to provide us.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments under finance? Hearing none, the items presented by Dr. Pushchak will move over to the regular board meeting next week. We will now recognize Mr. Jeremy Blazer for Building and Grounds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have nothing at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Blazer. Chair will now recognize Mrs. Lee for Personnel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a few items for next week under consideration. They include A, ESS substitute list additions as listed, B, service substitute list additions, C, appointments, D, resignations, E, leave requests, F, tuition reimbursement, and G, conference requests.
Does anyone have any questions about the items presented under personnel?
Mr. President, I just have one question. Under appointment C, will that be part of your talk next week, Mr. Berlin?
Yes.
Blank as blank as blank?
Yes. So actually, that is on my list to share with the board tonight. I just confirmed that this evening before the board meeting. Mrs. Lauren Fye has indicated that she will accept that position. So that's going to be the administrative recommendation. And we'll have a little more details on start date and that type of thing for next week. But she taught here for many years and is an excellent educator. She's been an administrator in Erie now for a while, and we really think that she will be a great fit for our students and for our school district.
Thank you, Dr. Berlin. Are there any other questions under personnel? Hearing none, those items will be moved to our agenda for next week. Chair now recognizes Mrs. Burlingham for policy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I currently have nothing under policy as of now.
Thank you, Mrs. Burlingham. Chair now recognizes Mr. Morvay for curriculum.
Mr. President, currently I have no items on the agenda for next week.
Thank you, Mr. Morvay. Chair now recognizes Mr. Williams for technology.
Mr. President, I have nothing at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. The chair now recognizes Mr. Brummagem for transportation.
Mr. President, I have one item for next week's agenda. That's the transportation request, item A.
Any questions on the transportation requests in the attachment? Hearing none, those will be moved over for next week's meeting. Thank you, Mr. Brummagem. We'll now turn to Mrs. Hetherington for athletic and extracurricular.
Thank you, Mr. President. As of right now, I will have two items. Item A is volunteer lists. As on the agenda, and then item B will be extracurricular appointments as listed on the agenda.
Thank you, Mrs. Hetherington. Are there any questions on the list additions or the appointments? Hearing none, those will be added to next week's agenda as well. Under miscellaneous this evening, we have the Erie County Technical School Joint Operating Committee representative appointment that will be on for next week to appoint Mr. Stephen Morvay from our board here to continue to serve excellently, might I add, as the Joint Operating Committee representative for our district. Also, we have some items to declare as surplus listed in the attachment. Does anyone have any questions on those items under miscellaneous?
Good job, Steve.
Thank you. Keep it rolling. We'll roll it back.
All right. Hearing none, we will move that over to next week's meeting. Also for next week, Mr. Morvay, will we have an Erie County Technical School report?
You will have an excellent technical school report next week.
Thank you, Mr. Morvay.
That'll be in our December Joint Operating Committee, which was right before Christmas last year.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We look forward to hearing that next
Mr.
week.
President.
The chair will now recognize Dr. Pushchak. Will we have a Tri-County Intermediate Unit report?
Yes, Mr. President, and I will try my best to follow the example set by my Erie County Technical School colleague. I will do as best I can next week.
Thank you, Dr. Pushchak. Get extra rest and lots of studying. Now it's time for board correspondence and dialogue. Is there anything up for discussion this evening from our board members?
Mr. President,
Yes, Dr. Pushchak.
I'd just like to welcome our new face to the dais, Mr. Englert. We hope things are going well for you in your new transition, and we hope they continue to go well, so welcome. You look good up here on the stage, Mr. Englert. That's all, Mr. President.
Thank you, Dr.
Mr. President, if you don't mind,
Yes,
I
sir.
will echo the comments made earlier regarding the audit report that we heard this morning, or this afternoon, and knowing that the amount of effort that it does take to achieve a clean opinion and clean audit is very highly done. So we appreciate, again, all those efforts as well as the firm, and I understand the consistency is a positive thing regarding firms that do outside audits or other folks. It's certainly worth, as Mr. Blazer has indicated, potentially maybe looking at the cost side of things, but I understand that there is value in that consistency as well as the performance that they have provided back to us. So there is value along those lines as well. So appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Absolutely agreed, Mr. Morvay. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Oh, Mrs.
I
Burlingham.
have one thing. I'm going to take us back for a minute to the holiday season, just for a quick second, road trip with me. Just because there was some fantastic, just like holiday things that happened, the Mrs. Cage, the choir concert, all the things. There's just always such a great turnout, and everyone comes together for the baking and all. It was very good. I loved watching the kids do the chorus, the high school. It was fantastic. So I'm excited to see what's to come in the spring and the musical and all the fun things. So. Great work.
Absolutely.
got.
Also in attendance myself, and just thoroughly impressed with not just the job that our educators do, but the support from our community, parents, grandparents, folks coming out to see our kiddos excel in their chosen disciplines, and the arts is spectacular. So it was very enjoyable. Anything else for the good of the order? Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
So move, Pushchak.
Second, Blazer.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.